green screen.
Check it out. Yep, I've got a green screen, Darren. That's all I have right now.
But you're making progress.
It's yeah. I just spent probably an hour this morning with some kind of software that was supposed to help with that, and it turns out it doesn't. So that was an effort somewhat wasted. But I got my green
Getting
screen,
closer.
so
Yeah, I have mine, but I haven't. I'm taking it out of the package, and I haven't figured out
yep.
the thing. So yeah.
If you
So
come up with
well,
an answer, let me know because
yeah,
I just really was flailing. But hey, it's a step by step thing, right?
I like that about this. Maybe we're gonna keep going. We'll keep learning along the way.
Right. I
So
think we will one way or another. How's it going?
so going really well.
Awesome.
Yeah, I had a super busy teaching week last week, so I'm
Okay.
actually really behind on my podcast, listening to podcasts. So,
Oh yeah.
but yeah, it's good. It's good. It's good to be busy.
Right.
It
Right.
was a good challenge. I learned a lot. I feel like so.
Yes.
I had the same workshop that same 2 hour workshop I did 4 different times within the same company. So
Oh really?
it was
Wow.
really interesting to kind of tailor the material as um, over the week to
Yeah.
try out some stuff. So
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah. I
yeah,
always find that teaching is one of the best ways to learn. Right.
right. Yeah, no
So
kidding. I feel like I now if I could just capture the what I learned and then
yes.
remember that next time.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, it sounds like the format we're going to use today is the ball is in your court, right? And so you
Yeah,
suggested a podcast for me to listen to,
yeah.
and I have, and it was
Okay, good.
excellent. So I'm looking
Wasn't it
forward to
good?
talking with you about it. Yeah, there's a lot of
Yeah,
stuff there to talk about.
yeah. And I think we're on at least on the edge of promoting this new book called Atomic Habits by James
Mm.
Clear, who's
Mm-hmm.
actually new to me. I guess I must have somewhere along the way started following him on Twitter.
Oh, okay.
But when he started, he was kind of, um, what not previewing, but he was teasing as the
Mm-hmm.
book was getting ready to be released. And I
Okay.
thought, man, he's speaking my language.
Yeah.
So I got the book right away, and I'm only just a couple chapters in, but
Okay.
I think we're going to start hearing conversations about it. And the
That's
reason
great.
I suggest it is because I feel like it so much lines up with my approach
Mm-hmm.
to what I call attentional fitness. So
Mm-hmm.
what's your are you new to this guy too? This James
Yes,
Clear?
brand new. Never heard of him before,
Okay.
and really liked also what he was saying, and made me think of a bunch of observations and examples. So yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about it with you. Maybe you could. Also, we kind of need to introduce the podcast itself.
Oh
The
right.
one you feed. Yeah,
Right.
can you tell us about your experience with that?
Yeah. Yeah, so that's been on my radar for quite a while. So some guys, actually local guys in the
Hmm.
Columbus, Ohio area, came up with this podcast and they interview different thinkers. It's all around habits
Hmm.
and specifically around thinking and changing habits, changing behaviors. They
Hmm.
get quite an impressive list of writers and speakers on
Geez,
their
that's great.
show. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
encourage people to check it out. One of my favorites was they had a poet,
Mm-hmm.
Ellen Bass,
Hmm.
but they get a lot of the big name motivational folks.
Yeah.
So
Oh, that's
um,
great.
yeah, it's really cool. And they interviewed Shinzen Young, who's one of my most influential
Yes.
teachers. So
Yes.
yeah, check out the one you feed.
That's
They
great.
always start their conversations with that parable. The one you feed comes from that parable about the
Hmm.
father talking to the
Yes.
grandchild about
Yes. Yes. I've
right.
I've often wondered the real source of that story,
Yeah,
because it doesn't strike me as 100% Native American. So I think it might be a little bit of a there might be a little bit of a historical twist on that with maybe a colonial insertion or something. But anyway,
yeah.
one of these
I
days
would
I'll
not
get
be
to the root of
surprised.
it.
Yeah,
But it's a
yeah,
great story all the same. I mean, it really does speak to the very essence of our conditioning and how we change our minds.
yeah. And it seems like a deep question to play with. There's not really one clear answer, which I don't
Right.
know how many they've got tons of episodes and they always use that to launch their
Yeah,
conversation.
yeah, that's
So,
cool. So what I wanted to
uh,
do, what I thought
yeah.
would be useful, is just to jump in and say, to anybody that's watching this particular episode, this is mindful in real life, in your life, and in my life, and in everybody else's
Right.
life. And the whole purpose of this podcast is to explore the issues and the challenges and the techniques and the approaches that go around making mindfulness useful in your everyday life. And one of the things that we've kind of hit on is this idea of let's pull in guests, but let's pull in guests in different ways. One of these episodes we'll have a person in the flesh, so to speak, but we're
Yeah.
also pulling in guests through little clips and discussions around other things that are out there, books, podcasts, TED Talks, whatever it might be that grabs our fancy that seem like a good topic to kind of have a conversation about. That's kind of our approach for this podcast.
Yeah, definitely. And it's like this one feels like a mini book club
Yes,
talk about a
yes,
book we haven't yet read, but that's okay.
yeah, yeah,
Because
exactly, yeah.
but I think that's how book
Right,
clubs go.
it is, it is.
But what really has struck me right away, well, number one, I'm super jealous that he came up with this title because the way he's used, so the atomic habits in the title
Yeah,
uh, is that the atom being the smallest unit or the smallest component part. So it's a really small. He's talking there about really small changes practiced over time can lead to big results.
yeah,
So I'm
exactly.
really interested in his. He seems to be thinking a lot about this tension, and this is what I hope to talk about with you today. Is
Mm,
how you think about this tension between goals
mm-hmm.
and the actual efforts we're
Yeah,
making to get towards those goals. And
yeah,
it's something I spend a lot of time thinking about. And how I run into it is the promotion of mindfulness or trying to make it attractive to people or trying to get people on board. Why should you practice?
mm,
The emphasis is always, of course, on the outcomes.
mm,
And then I find that the outcomes very often get in the way of experiencing the outcomes because people
yes,
they kind of expect them to happen quicker, or
yeah,
they're not convinced the outcomes will ever happen.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's
That's
tricky,
right.
right?
That's right. And then mindfulness is, especially if we're talking about the sort of meditative aspect of mindfulness, that gets even trickier because when you're when you got some kind of a practice where you're practicing whatever it might be, 5, 10, 20, whatever it might be for any individual person on as daily a basis as they can manage, um, you got this you got the gravitational pull of everything else in your life. And then that's showing up in your mind while you're meditating. It's showing up in your
Yeah.
mind while you're preparing to, or saying I really should be. All these kinds of things. These other forces are coming in saying, well, actually, what I really should be doing is X, Y, and Z, because those are things that I have to get accomplished. And when I accomplish those, maybe I'll get around to meditating, etc. And and the thing that strikes me about that is that when we talk about goals with meditation, it's trickier because as soon as you introduce a
Mm-hmm.
goal, it changes your practice.
Mm-hmm.
It means that you're striving, that you're trying to push towards something, and that's an awesome strategy for some goal, for achieving some
Right.
goals. But it's not the best strategy for achieving any kind of accomplishments in meditation, because you're kind of working with this. In my experience, you're working with this kind of amorphous, this kind of almost tricksterish
Mm-hmm.
kind of phenomenon of your mind. So
Mm-hmm.
you're there, you're watching your mind, you're bringing your attention to your breath or whatever object you want. You're getting distracted. You're noticing things. You're getting pulled in one direction or another, and all of it. And then you're bringing judgment in, saying, "Well, I shouldn't be doing that. I'm supposed to be, you know." And and then to introduce then goal striving into that really
Right.
stirs the pot, because
Yeah.
then am I achieving my goals? I mean, this is
Yeah.
what he's talking about too, from the perspective of overall improvement, self improvement, right?
Yeah. Well, and so, yeah, and yet there has to be, let's say, something
Yes,
goading me towards something.
yes,
And I think he's in agreement with us that that it's almost like the goal is more of an orientation
hmm,
that it's sort of I
yeah, I like
reflect
that.
on my values or my who do I want to be? What kind of a person do I want to be? How can I aim in that
Mm,
direction?
mm,
And then I'm pretty sure even in this conversation, he said already, as soon as you come up with what that goal is, then putting it aside.
yeah, Yeah,
And
yeah.
I really do agree with that. Now, I naively discovered this because in my own meditation practice, I sort of had I had a personal challenge. Like someone challenged me,
Hmm.
try this for a couple years
Oh, okay.
and see what you think. And it
Okay.
was kind of a specific thing, but it was my first reaction to this invitation, I guess you'd say, is
Hmm.
that seems absurd, like a 2 year trial period.
Right.
But I think what it
That's
made
interesting.
possible is that it did have me put aside my emphasis on the outcomes. And
Hmm.
when I run into teaching people or trying to help people get a consistent practice going, is that they tend to evaluate every period of practice
Hmm.
and sort of making
Yes.
they
Yes.
almost make a
Exactly.
habit of that
Yes.
not even criticism. It's just
Evaluation,
yeah, it's
assessment,
an
saying
evaluation. Yeah,
was that a home run, or did it, did I just
it,
get to first base or something
is
like
this
that?
working? Does
Right.
this
Right.
do any? How could this possibly do anything? And as
Right.
you were describing it, that when we're trying to be more objective about our own thoughts and feelings in real time,
Hmm.
it's it's very, what would you say? It's not laser like,
Yeah.
and it's not but it's also complicated by we're trying to make sense and we're trying to sort things out all the while we're trying to observe. So it's very slippery and, like you said, trickster. I think it's
Yeah.
full of paradox and
Yeah.
counterintuitive,
That's right.
right?
And when I think about my own experience, so I've been a dedicated mindfulness practitioner now for 5.5 years,
Okay.
so not as long as you have. And I'd been involved in sort of contemplative work and philosophy, ways of thinking
Mm-hmm.
contemplatively before that, and that wasn't sufficient because it's not about thinking your way out of whatever traps you're falling into. And so for me, it wasn't. I didn't start the practice because uh, I felt like I wanted to achieve a goal of peace of mind, or
Yeah.
I wanted to become enlightened, or those things. I started with the feeling like if that sort of thing comes my way, whatever, however you define those things, cool. But
Okay.
for me, it was really I had hit a point. I mean, you can call it a midlife crisis or whatever, but I had hit a point where I suddenly realized what a stranger I was to my own mind.
Okay. Okay. Yeah,
Eh,
because I was going to ask, yeah,
Yeah.
that's an uncomfortable place. It's
Yes.
not
Very
like,
uncomfortable.
oh, it's not like a hobby. I think I'll take up
No.
whatever. It's
No.
like something's not comfortable here,
Right. It wasn't
right?
to become more productive at work. It wasn't to mostly because I had been sort of shocked into discovering how little I knew.
Hmm.
And the less I knew, the more of a danger I was to myself, and maybe and definitely to my relationships with other people. And you kind of coast through life sometimes, and
Right.
things come your way or they don't, but you just kind of fall back on strategies that you developed when you were younger, that
Hmm.
got you through.
Right.
And then you find out, maybe not everybody does, or maybe not everybody needs to, but certainly for me, I found out that those strategies weren't working anymore,
Right.
and that I really needed a new relationship to my own mind and experience, and
Yeah.
it was kind of urgent. Um,
Yeah.
and so that's why I come at goals from a different direction, because I realized that my goal wasn't to achieve any particular state of mind or any particular accomplishment. It was a different sort of objective.
Yeah, no, I totally relate to it. And I always wonder about, like, I don't think there's one formula or one set of circumstances that motivates someone to actually start a
Yes,
consistent
right.
practice. But it does seem to me that I have seen it and I do believe that this practice can lead to greater satisfaction with things that are going well. So, like, you
Mm-hmm.
can have a better
Yes,
relationship to pleasure, but that's
absolutely.
not usually what brings someone to explore
Yeah,
mindfulness. It's
yeah,
more
that's
that
right.
I'm tired of, I've depleted some way of being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Nothing's working, and it's not comfortable here. So, and that's certainly my experience as well. I realized
Mm,
this. There's something in what James Clear is saying. He has this line about what we're talking about here, outcomes are a lagging measure of your habits,
Mm.
meaning if I
Mm.
look at my body right in the mirror today, it's not what I ate yesterday or if I exercised last week. It's the cumulative habits over the last, I don't know, the few months
Yeah.
and years led to
Yeah.
this
That's
body at
true.
this point in time, right?
Yeah.
And so it's similar if we take that and make a parallel to what you're saying, we realize we kind of pause or catch ourselves. I think of it in terms of kind of a homesickness or a
Mm.
estrangement. My life doesn't
Mm.
feel like I live here. It's like I don't feel welcome here
Yeah.
in my own
Right.
mind
Right. Right. Yeah.
somehow. But
Yeah.
then I think something for me to be willing to experiment, which I do think it's an invitation to experiment. It had to be an acknowledgement that my habits for the because I was 36 when I decided to start to really try this. So I'm 36 and I have a ton of habits that have led to how
Mm.
I felt at that
Exactly.
time, right?
Exactly.
And so
That's
then
right.
there was when the guy said try this for 2 years, I thought, okay, I had been working in mental health for 10 years and I never heard
Mm-hmm.
anyone say, you're
Mm-hmm.
having this struggle? Try this for 2 years.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
try this medication for 10 days or 2 months, or try this strategy or try that strategy.
Mm-hmm.
But it seemed to be very insightful that it takes a lot of
Mm.
time
Yeah.
to get to here.
Yeah. That's right.
Something.
You've probably heard this. It's kind of a cliche in the meditation world, I suspect. But and I don't remember who was the author of it. I recall that maybe it was the Dalai Lama that told somebody this. But
Okay.
basically, if you start meditating, you should check in to see your progress. You should assess your progress. He said, say once every 10 or 15 years.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah,
Yeah. I don't think
and I
I've
think
heard
that
that, but
speaks.
I love
Oh,
it.
okay, yeah, I
Yeah,
think it
yeah.
speaks directly to what you're saying, and what that podcast was about. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, so then how do we get people to I
we're
wondered.
living in an impatient society, right?
Yeah, right.
We don't want those returns to be 15 years from now. Yeah,
Right. And if I want to get a book published, I'm pretty sure they're not going to want the title to be um, hang out for 10 or 15 years with the possibility of maybe hating yourself less.
right. Yeah,
Right. They want the
exactly.
book to say 7 steps to happiness by
That's right.
this weekend, right? By
That's
this
right.
weekend. I want to know now.
Yeah,
So it does
yeah.
create this thing I'm always aware of, this tension. I guess it goes back to I have an awareness of the tension. In order to promote what I think would be really transformative
Hmm.
for people,
Hmm.
I
I
need
like that.
to at least report about the possible outcomes.
Hmm.
But then for them to even have a chance of experiencing those outcomes, I've got to convince them to put that aside.
Yeah,
That's challenging, and I think
it's
it's
huge.
maybe
Yeah.
I think what you're saying is, and that's I find it liberating to acknowledge. All I can do is sort of put it out there, and then you never know who is uncomfortable enough
Hmm.
to start or to
Hmm.
give it a test,
Right.
right? And I think I don't even think I realized how uncomfortable I was
Hmm.
when I started. It's sort of that even started to deepen as I went, right?
Mm,
Does that seem
yeah, that's really a good point. Yeah, that's one of the things that I hear from students who are practicing mindfulness, and I've certainly experienced it in my own life. And what I'm hearing you say is an example of that would be, as you begin to practice, you start to notice what a circus is going on in your life and
oh,
in your head, more than
yeah,
you ever noticed before. So it almost
right,
seems like things are getting worse,
right,
because you're actually confronting the things that you took for granted or completely ignored or denied or
exactly.
repressed or whatever, and you're actually saying no. I'm welcoming you.
Oh
and
yeah, that's right.
and you and I
Yeah.
have had a conversation about this before, off camera, about how what a struggle that is to bring that to people who want to learn to practice, because
Hmm.
you're telling them, okay, what I'm going to introduce you to is a set of techniques for making yourself initially more uncomfortable, and
Absolutely.
the results might, you can't count on results at a certain by a certain deadline.
and they won't be steady, and it won't be
And they
linear,
won't be steady. That is
and
so
they
true.
and they won't be
Yes.
reliable. And the other thing I feel like what one of the things I'm taking a gamble on is it's like full disclosure.
Hmm.
I have not transcended something.
Right.
I'm in the trenches alongside you. Anybody who wants to be in the trenches, we're in the trenches. That means I've got some amazing tools and tricks that I have found to be really helpful.
Hmm.
But that does not mean I use them all the time.
Right.
But I just use them more than never.
Right.
And that more than never is huge.
Yes.
It's hard to convey that in a way
Yes.
in like a market or a
Oh,
commodity
yeah. It's going to
world.
be impossible to come up with a tagline that doesn't make people just run out the door, you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
And also I think about, what you mentioned just a couple minutes ago about reliability. I think that's such a key thing for anybody who's doing mindfulness practice. Um, I feel like the message we're getting now in popular society, popular culture, from mainstream sources is that this is going to improve your life. It's a lot of work, but you set your goals, and it sounds like going to the gym, right? And
Right.
you're trying to build your endurance and things. But what they don't tell you is the very point that you made, is that it's unreliable,
It's
fundamentally
unreliable.
unreliable.
It
and
is.
and and this is where the mindfulness practice really comes in outside of meditation. And it's such an important part of, I think, the work that you do with people is greeting the that discomfort that comes with, let's say you've been practicing regularly for, I don't know, a few months or something, and you feel like you have some stability. You
Mm,
sense some stability that you didn't have before, or that you didn't have enough of before, and you're feeling good. And then you join your family for Thanksgiving,
oh
or
yeah.
and
Right.
suddenly it all comes apart, and you
Totally.
find yourself saying the things that you used to say, thinking the things you used to think, feeling the sense of rejection or anger or whatever it is that
Right.
that was so much a part of your upbringing. And you think, wow, I spent several months doing this practice and it's all for crap. It's just no
Right.
good, because
Right.
when the rubber meets the road, I'm still my old self, right?
Right. Right.
And
Right.
so that
Right.
that that reliability, I think, probably that unreliability is probably what drives people away from the practice, because they're just like, this didn't work, I'm going to go back
Right.
to my old standbys, whatever they might
Yeah.
be.
Even though I would, yeah, and that what we can try to convince people, but
Yeah.
is that even though, let's say, well, what does it mean that it worked or not?
Yeah.
So
Right.
it
Right.
feels
Exactly.
like I'm pulled all the way back to the beginning point, but I would say that it's not actually true
That's
because
right.
you're experiencing it differently. Even if it's still painful, there's some observation taking
Yes.
place. You're just realizing that
Yes.
this is. It kind of reminds me of running a marathon.
Hmm.
Let's say if someone trains for 4 months to run a marathon, and then on the race day they find it
Mm.
physically challenging, does that mean
Mm.
that their training didn't work?
Or they even have to drop out of the race,
Oh yeah,
or
right.
yeah,
That's right.
right,
You don't
yeah,
even right. You maybe you didn't even complete, but that doesn't mean
yeah.
you didn't train right, or it
No,
doesn't
it
also
doesn't.
mean that your heart is not stronger, your legs aren't stronger than 4 months
Yeah,
ago. But
yeah.
it means when this is an important part of what I'm trying to convey is if the challenge level is higher, then I
Hmm.
do think we have to lower the bar
Hmm.
on our expectation that the benefit is clear, or that it feels
Mm.
like it feels like we're accomplishing something. I actually think some of the times where I feel like I've accomplished the most is when it didn't feel like I was accomplishing
Yeah,
anything.
yeah.
But I'm willing,
That's
like you
right.
said, I'm willing to greet it. I'm willing
Yeah.
to not push so strongly or
I
insist so strongly
I love
that
that
it not
point,
be there.
because what's cool about that is, and this has happened numerous times to me, and I'm sure it has to you too, where you actually are surprised. So it's nothing you
Yeah,
planned for, and it doesn't just come up when you predict, but rather you just surprise yourself. You say to yourself, "Wow, I had no idea that I would be reacting so differently to a situation. But
that's
because of
right.
this practice, now I'm saying things differently, or interacting differently with people." And it just strikes you that, where did that come from?
And yeah, and it also strikes me as yeah, absolutely. It's like um not dramatic.
Yeah, not
So
dramatic at all.
I think
Yeah.
of let's think of an example from parenting.
Okay.
So there would be times when like when my daughter was young, there would be certain things I would either hope for her or need from her, or something that I would want something to be
Mm,
resolved, or some,
mm,
I don't know. And we
mm.
had a good relationship, but every parent who raises children to adulthood experiences the individuation
Yep.
process.
Yep.
It's inevitable, and it's actually we
Yeah.
want this,
Yeah.
but it's
That's
not
right.
comfortable. But as a parent, you're thinking, I just want them to be safe. I just want
Hmm.
them to thrive as adults. I want them to be prepared I want them to have friends, whatever.
Mm,
And when you
mm,
see that they're making their own life
mm,
difficult or they're still
mm,
learning, you're kind
mm.
of yearning for resolution for them, I guess, but it also is kind of a resolution for
Yeah.
yourself.
Absolutely.
There's a bundle of things that
Yeah.
are going on there. And then I can't think of a specific example, and I think it's related to the point I'm trying to make, is that some some conversation would happen, and it just addressed all that in reverse. It's just a
Yeah.
simple. There's no drama. It's not a reality show. It's not a climax of a
Mm,
movie.
mm,
It's
mm,
not an entertaining
mm,
story. It
mm.
feels more like, oh my gosh, what if this resolution is, I'll take it even though it's not something that I could tell somebody. There's no clear story. It's not we went from here to here. It's more like it gets folded in. I don't know if
Yeah.
I'm conveying that well, but it's like it what back to what reminded me of it is that sense of surprise. Wow, I totally reacted differently. But
Yes.
the way I reacted differently feels very satisfying, but it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't result in a story. And
Mm-hmm.
I think so much of our
Mm, I
lives
like
are
that.
like it doesn't, I couldn't make a tweet or a headline that can
Right.
grab people's attention. And
Right.
that puts me back in this conundrum of
Mm-hmm.
what gets the most attention is the most dramatic. And
Yeah.
what gets attention, bad choices lead to really interesting stories.
Um, I feel like if we understand that what we're experiencing, the moment we're experiencing now, is the result of all the moments that came before it, all the
Right.
decisions and all the actions we took and things like that. Then we understand that right now we're creating the conditions for a
The
future state.
future.
Yeah, and that
Yeah.
ties in very well with the podcast that you wanted to talk about today, because that's what he's saying is that these small investments pay off at some point down the road in ways maybe, and I'm going to tack on in ways maybe that we don't even expect,
That's
or,
right.
or, or, or ways that are so different from what we originally thought, but still, if we're doing this good work, that it's
Right.
still an improvement in one way or another. And
Yeah.
so, we're one teacher put it, that we need to sort of see that what we're really doing with mindfulness practice isn't so much sprouting a seed, or making a seed grow, making a
Hmm.
seed sprout and grow into a plant. What we're doing is working on the conditions, the
The
soil,
conditions. Yeah, no, I
so
love
that
that.
when that seed enters the soil, it ends up sprouting in a way that's
Yeah, you put the
that
emphasis on
flourishes.
the necessary and sufficient conditions to, and then let the flower just
Yeah,
like get out of the way.
yeah,
But as long as you
exactly.
set it up to be possible.
That's it.
And as you say that, I'm wondering. I try to explore even my own question a bit here. There
Mm,
seems to me the current puzzle, when trying to scale this up to groups,
yeah.
is
Okay.
do I, as an individual, change everybody else? Do I
Mm,
make the world better by kind of
mm,
making everyone behave in the way I think they should, or do I? Let's see if let's see if this makes any sense. I'm trying to put this back down into in real life scenario. So my daughter was in the Detroit Marathon,
mm,
and I was at the finish line. And I'm not a
mm-hmm,
sports fan. I'm not usually a cheerer,
mm-hmm.
right? But I have run marathons, so I have some investment here. I know what it's like to be crossing a finish line like that, and I'm
Right.
also anticipating my daughter crossing the finish line. What I noticed was a lot of apathy stands.
Mm.
There's nothing more wonderful than feeling like I can't go on, I must go on, I can't go on, I must go on, and then
Mm-hmm.
that last half
Mm-hmm.
mile with a roaring crowd.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and this crowd was indifferent at best and kind
Hmm.
of texting and I think
Wow.
that I
Oh
was
yeah.
thinking that the thing is it could have been just that time, it could have been an anomaly, but I
Mm.
was thinking that everyone's there for one, they're waiting for one person to cross the line instead of
Mm.
waiting for instead of cheering on the accomplishment of everyone.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my little personal trap is
Mm.
to jump to the world would be
Mm.
better if I could get you all to see what you're
Mm-hmm.
missing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
What you're missing.
Yeah. For
But
sure.
actually, the world will probably be better if I don't micromanage them and just focus on
Yeah.
my response. But
That's great.
it's a trap, right? It's because I think this is what we're currently stuck with. It's everyone should everyone else should do X, Y, and Z so that I don't have to feel something. The polarization is someone else's fault, I
Yeah.
guess. I don't
Wow,
know. I know.
that's great. I love that example, and like a bunch of things occurred to me as you were saying it. One is that human beings are, and this returns to some things we were talking about before. But groups is a very important area for us to consider. Human beings communicate in overt ways and also in very subtle ways. Body language, facial expressions, even maybe in some ways that we don't even know that we're interpreting each other's behavior and reactions. And so we're always watching each other, even when we don't know
Yeah.
we are. And so you've got a group environment of some kind, and someone is modeling behavior that is pro-social, let's say. In other words,
Okay.
that supports positive, human interaction. And it may be that everybody looks like they're not paying attention, but in some way there's a feeling, there's an energy that changes because of the posture and because of the sound of the words, anything like that. And so
Yeah.
I think,
Huh.
I experience this when I'm teaching all the time. I have a student, I have a class full of students. They leave at the end of the semester, off they go, and I feel like, well, did that do anything? And I'll
Yeah.
never know.
Right. You'll
In
never
most
know.
cases, I'll never know. And
Right.
that's this
Right.
idea of just letting it go and letting it be what it needs to be. And so one thought I have in response to your story and sticking with the marathon metaphor, is you've got this situation where you then are modeling the behavior of a loving dad who's so proud of his daughter, right? And
Right.
and it's going to feel different for you because you're looking around and as far as you're concerned, everybody's texting and all this kind of stuff. But there's going to be somebody in that crowd who's going, wow, that's the dad I wish I had had.
Huh.
Or you know what I
Yeah. I
mean?
hadn't thought
You
of
never
that. You're
know
right. Yeah.
what
You never
people
know.
are.
You do never
Yeah,
know.
and so you got that side of it, right, where we just can never know and we just let it be. And then you got the other side where you say, well, let's look at the structure of this marathon, you know, and this I'm just running with this thing, no pun
Yeah.
intended, but you know, but you're looking at the structure and you're like, well, what is it about the way this was set up that would encourage people to not care?
Yeah. Oh my
And
gosh.
so,
Yeah.
what
Right.
role can I play in, do I have to get on the committee or, do I have to talk to the right people? Do I have to network a little bit to start asking those questions? And other people are probably other parents are going to say, you know what, that happened to me too. Maybe we could have a different kind of marathon,
Uh-huh.
and so that's another kind of mindfulness. But
Oh, you
it's
know
the
what?
more
You're just like, I
collective
didn't even
kind.
think of this until you said it, but now if I go back and replay it, there was something about the conditions that were not that conducive to the
Okay.
celebration.
Yeah. Interesting.
And I was like, I think you just made me realize I was comparing kind of apples to oranges because
Hmm.
the race that I crossed the finish line, I think some care was made for that very thing. And one
Wow.
example would be at this recent one, there was a person kind of randomly calling out names. So they
Mm-hmm.
would see the runner approach and they would look up
Mm-hmm.
a database with the number and the name and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
it was monotone and it
Yeah.
didn't have any human interest. It kind of
Yeah.
had a very passive feel. And the
Yeah.
way we were sitting, the way we were standing, whatever, wasn't really conducive, and there wasn't maybe music or something that
Right,
could have
right,
pumped
right.
up the crowd. And
Yes,
just those
yes.
small things could have
The
brought
little things can tweak everything. Yeah, yeah,
which makes me wonder how, for me, a trap is, it's like, it, I don't know if it's a trap. It's a trap I get stuck in. If I feel powerless to change the group, I don't know where to begin. But I
yeah.
do find some optimism in. I think little nudges and a few passionate people can kind of elevate
Yes,
the others.
agreed.
And maybe that's a better thing to like. Can we set the stage for? Can we set up the conditions for at least some percentage of people are willing to be surprised or willing to engage.
Yeah,
It just reminded
nice.
me, and we can kind of wind down here, but I was just thinking of, I mean, this is kind of a life story for me too, like a theme in my life where when I was younger, and I've mentioned the past growing up in a church in Kansas, so I was just part of that small percentage of people who did 80% of the, 20% of the people do 80% of the work.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's fun and fun and fun until you start to get resentful or tired. But I think it's sort of like, it's an inevitability in groups that you can't wait for 100% to get on board.
Yeah,
But we do need those 10 to
yeah,
20,
yeah.
25%. We need those people, and
Yeah.
maybe we can take turns doing it. But it's kind of, I find that a little bit optimistic that you just need a small percentage of people to be
That's true.
engaged, to
That's true.
have difficult conversations, to check their tone on social media. I mean, it's hard. The complexity makes it harder with the social media, but those little tiny little gestures and little tiny constraints, I think, do have an
Yeah.
effect. So,
There's one more thing I want to talk about before we sign
okay.
off, if it's okay with you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
During that podcast, and I could always make an excerpt of that bit, that because we
Okay.
haven't talked about this yet.
Okay. Let's do that.
In that particular section of the podcast, he was talking about identities. Remember that?
Oh, right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
such a fascinating conversation for
Me
me
too. I thought so too.
because, yeah, I mean, his notion of identity was importantly different than the kind of identities that are being kind of reified and
Yeah.
made into solid objects
Right.
nowadays.
Used a word there, identity, and you talk about that there are three layers of behavior change, right? One is we change our outcomes. The second is we change our processes. And then the last is we change our identity. So talk about the role of identity in building good habits or changing behavior.
Well, in a sense, I think true behavior change is actually identity change because you can imagine like it's one thing to say, I want this, but it's something very different to say, I am this. Like once you adopt an identity, adopt a particular belief, you're not even really pursuing behavior change anymore. You're just acting in alignment with the type of person you already believe that you are.
Yep.
So one of the examples that I give in the book is like, imagine that you have two people who are smokers and are trying to quit. And the first person you offer a cigarette and you offer them a cigarette and they say, no, thanks, I'm trying to quit. And the second person you offer them a cigarette and they say, oh, no, thanks, I'm not a smoker. And same action, they're both turning down the cigarette, but the first person still identifies as someone who is a smoker and they're trying to do something they're not. The second person is like, I'm a non-smoker. And that signals a shift in identity.
Yep.
And that is a powerful thing because once you see yourself as that kind of person, you have additional reason to reinforce that behavior.
Yep.
And this comes back to why I think small habits are important because the natural question anybody has at this point, they're like, okay, if you buy into this idea that identity and behavior are linked, it's like, well, how can I change my identity then? That seems like a difficult thing to do. And I think the answer is small habits and tiny actions are the best method we have for shaping our identity.
Yep.
And the reason I say that is because, in a sense, your habits are how you embody a particular identity. Every time you make your bed in the morning, you embody the identity of someone who is clean and organized. Every time you go to the gym, you embody the identity of someone who is a fit person. Every time you write one sentence, you embody the identity of someone who is a writer. And it's kind of like every action you take is a vote for the type of person that you want to become, or the type of person that you believe that you are. And as you cast these votes, as you repeat these little habits, you kind of build up evidence of being that type of person. And I really think the evidence there is like a crucial part, because it gives you something to root the identity in. It gives you proof of being that kind of person. Because a lot of the time people will say things like, fake it till you make it. But fake it till you make it is a little different than what I'm talking about here, because it's asking you to believe something without having evidence for it.
Right.
And there's a word for beliefs that don't have evidence. We call it delusion. You know, at some point, like, the brain doesn't like this disconnect.
That's right. Yeah.
But if you can turn around and say, hey, I've written one sentence 13 out of the last 14 days, all of a sudden you have evidence of being a writer.
Yep.
And so your habits and actions give you proof of who you are. And gradually, over time, they can reshape your identity a little bit, or expand or upgrade it in some aspect.
And this is my take on it. I'd be kind of interested to see what you think. I think that the conversation with the podcast host, in combination with the guest, produced this possibility, this suggestion that identity isn't a solid aspect of oneself, but instead can be re-envisioned as a tool. So this really struck me, that we can take our identities, because we're as human beings, we just form identities. It's just what we do. It's part of the way we're wired. So we're always building identities around things. And, identities change through time, but we tend to hold on to them pretty tightly because it feels necessary to be a certain kind of person, or a certain kind of, even if these are negative things, right? As they were suggesting, I'm a smoker, that kind of identity versus I'm not a smoker. But the thing I took from that wasn't so much the idea that now I have to form a new identity that I then have to cling to, but rather I can use identity as a tool. I know how my mind works. I know my mind has a predisposition for forming identities. So why not have that, using that as the means to address the change that I need to achieve in my life. And then let that identity go when the time comes, right? So there's no commitment to maintaining a new. Now I'm not a smoker. There's no need to be one thing or the other, but instead to use that. To notice that when I start to define myself differently, it changes my relationship to the world and to myself. But to understand the fluidity of that, does that resonate with you?
No, and what makes me the hope, I start to see a trajectory of a kind of a developmental stage within a person's life, so that first I'm a boy or I'm a girl or whatever, and then I'm a member of I'm from Kansas, or it's like team. My team's better than your team. Let's say the example of something like my sports team is superior to your sports team. My football team, Buckeyes are better than Michigan, right? The Ohio State is better than Michigan. And then maybe at some point I'm willing to say it goes beyond Buckeyes and Michigan, and it goes to I love football.
Yep.
Or I love coming together every fall and playing this game. And this game requires two teams for us to do it. But I think But then, and I think because this notion that James Clear was talking about is, in the moment, if there's a packet of cigarettes and someone says, do you want a cigarette? And I've tried to quit smoking, and I say, no, thank you, or whatever. It's kind of hard. But I really kind of do want a cigarette. But if I say I'm not a smoker, I kind of shut that door. It helps me nudge past that temptation. And there's something here. And I think we're going to get here. It's really hard to see, but it's that. And I kind of what's the word? It's not handicap when you give somebody credit. It's hard. The challenge level is hard. What's an American? I think sometimes people are want to go backwards when it was easier, even though they're forgetting how many people that left out.
Mm-hmm.
But we're being asked to have an identity around something so
Yeah.
socially complex
Yeah.
that's just going to take. So the other thing I hear in what James Clear's point is there's a question whether or not I'm a non-smoker forever as an identity that's enough to hang everything on, but it's almost like, what are my values? What's important to me? How do I embody how would I embody what someone who would embody if they represented my best way of living or something? And I think you were saying about being a role model, but I think we all, it's like, we lose track of it, but all my positive traits were probably inspired by people I might have even forgotten. Right. And it could be little ways of teaching or talking or telling stories that I've absorbed.
Yeah.
But it's like, if I was navigating my life with more like, it's important to me to feel close to people. It's important for me to have a clear conscience. How does that impact the small choices I'm making during the day? And it does excite me to think that we can get beyond. I do believe if you take all our most divisive issues, I see that we're focused on the surface and we need to get to the root, and the root is really hard. And whether that's gun control or every major issue that we have that people split and take sides, there's a common ground underneath. Let's take gun control. There's fear. One team is team more guns and one team is team less guns, but what they share is, I want my children to be safe. And I think any move in the direction of us being able to have a conversation about that's really what we have in common, or how do we can we not rush to my team is right, but that this is a challenge, this is the scale, the complexity of this challenge is huge.
Well,
I don't know.
One ray of hope in there is that, in addition to being sort of what one psychologist would call pre-wired for forming identities, the other thing we're pre-wired for is expanding the circle of our identity. So my identity might be really in a very small circle of certain people who act a certain way or care about certain things or whatever. But then I actually have in me, it's just built in, the ability to make that circle broader, to encompass others as I start to see those connections.
That's right.
As I start to see those things, like you said, wanting to care, wanting to have my children be safe. If I'm in the right environment where I meet somebody who's got the completely opposite viewpoint on guns, but I find out through a conversation with them that we both want our kids to be safe, my circle necessarily expands, and I bet you that person's circle starts to expand too. And so, this is something we all are capable of. It doesn't mean you have to be a certain kind of person with a certain kind of politics. Every single one of us does this probably a lot more than we know.
I think you're right.
Cultivating that gives us a chance to find the common ground and reduce the phenomenon we're experiencing right now of all that polarization.
Well, I think that there's two things I'll say real quick about it is that from mindfulness, what sounds like it would be passive ends up being paradoxically the opposite of passive. So one would say if it's winners and losers, we're in trouble. But if it's like being willing to hear the other side is actually not passive, but actually exactly what we need. So that's one thing. And then the other thing that ties back to something you said earlier about the Arrival movie, translation. And this is where I find myself when this is where my attention needs to be personally in this matter. When I insist that someone else should understand me, I'm in trouble. When I put my energy to translating, if someone wishes me I don't know, they say they're praying for me, but I don't have a literal belief in that. If I make a stink about it, it feels absurd to me. But if I translate, what are they trying to convey?
Yes, exactly. What's the intent?
What's the intent? So translating the intent could be huge in setting the soil for people to be able to like have that
Absolutely.
expansive sense of the tribe being bigger. Uh, yeah, it's I do think down deep at a human level, we all yearn for that. We don't know how to navigate our way to it, and we're scared. We're
I love
scared of
that.
appearing passive.
So
Yeah.
completely. And so what I'm going to suggest is I'm going to send you a link, and if you
Okay.
wouldn't mind putting it in the description below
Sure.
this thing. I don't know if you've seen it yet, but somebody in social media shared it, and I hadn't seen it before. It was done by a Danish TV station. It was an
Okay.
ad. It was an ad
Was it like a
for.
beer or
No,
something?
that's
No.
another one. That's another
Okay.
good one.
Okay.
But this one doesn't involve beer.
Oh,
It's just human beings getting together, which you would think wouldn't work without beer, but there
right.
it is.
Right.
But I won't spoil it for you. But they bring in groups of people that represent different aspects of Danish society.
Okay.
Upper class people. They bring in working class people. They bring in farmers. They bring in some really rough looking guys, and they
Yeah.
bring in a whole bunch of people from different occupations and so forth. And then they start asking them questions that ends up grouping them differently. Very
This rings
powerful.
a bell. Yeah. Yeah. No. Yeah. This rings a
Yeah,
bell. Oh, I love this one.
very
Yeah.
powerful. So,
Yeah.
so I'll send you the link, and
Yeah.
let's
We'll
put
do
it in
that.
there so people will know what we're talking about at the end here. And I think it's a great way to leap from what we were talking about with mindfulness to how it might actually be applied.
Yeah, and we'll sign off here. But the next question I want to be asking is, how do we widen our conversation? This feels I'm really enjoying. It feels like we're having just real life
Yeah.
a chat we would have anyway, and we're trying to
Right.
capture it because.
Yeah.
But I do think, how do we start to begin to find there's others of us out
Yes.
there, and we've got to
Yes.
start looking for who else wants to be part of our conversation and
Yes.
who wants to. And I'm really interested in what other questions other people are going to have to bring to this,
Yeah.
and because I do feel like it's the tribe of the question askers, as opposed to the
Right.
people who have the right answer. That I don't have an answer, but I'm really
Right.
interested in the questions. So let's keep it going.
Let's do that.
All
Yeah.
right,
Okay.
all
Until
right.
next time, Darren.
Yeah, more later. Take care.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.